the history of a national minimum wage for Nigeria dates back to before independence. In fact, in the western region of Nigeria, or western Nigeria as you might want to call it, Chief Obafemi Awolowo has been reputed to have implemented the £5.06 policy of £5.06 minimum wage, which was applicable to all government workers in the western Nigeria. In fact, it was a serious campaign strategy for the action group in the build-up to the 1959 general election. However, not until 1981 did Nigeria enact a national minimum wage during the administration of former President Shehu Shagari. In 2000, during the administration of former President Olusegun Obasanjo, Nigeria enacted another national minimum wage, which was pegged at 5,500. Mind you, the National Minimum Wage Act of 1981 pegged the national minimum wage at 125 naira. Now, moving further down to year 2011, during the administration of former President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, Nigeria had another national minimum wage, which was pegged at 18,000 naira. Now, in 2019, which was during the administration of former President Muhammad Buhari, Nigeria had another national minimum wage pegged at 30,000 naira. But what then is a national minimum wage? Well, by the provisions of Section 3, Sub 2 of the National Minimum Wage Act of 2019, a national minimum wage is the total amount an employer is expected to pay the least or lowest paid wage earner in his or her establishment. Why should we now have a national minimum wage? There are several reasons for the enactment of a National Minimum Wage Act. Number one reason, which should be a given, is to protect low-age earners. It is also to ensure that the poverty gap is bridged, to bridge the poverty gap. It is also to ensure that there is decent work for all. Several other reasons. Now, let's move to some of the exceptions in the National Minimum Wage Act. Who are those persons or those people excluded from the application of the National Minimum Wage? Well, Section 2 of the National Minimum Wage Act of 2019 provides that the national minimum wage is a statute of general application, meaning that it is applicable throughout the Federation of Nigeria. So if you are in a private sector, if you are in the local government, if you are in the federal government, if you are in the state government, the National Minimum Wage Act applies to you. And in fact, in Section 9, Section 10, Section 15, there are punishments. There are, punishments for those who breach the provision of the National Minimum Wage Act. But now let's look at some of the exceptions to the application of the National Minimum Wage. In fact, Section 4 of the National Minimum Wage Act provides 5 exceptions to the application of the National Minimum Wage Act. Now let's look at them. Number 1, an employer or a worker who is in a part-time sort of employment is excluded from the application of the National Minimum Wage Act. Similarly, an employer who is engaged in a seasonal form of employment is also excluded from the application of the national minimum wage. An employer who is in a commission sort of job is also excluded from the application of the national minimum wage. Also, if you're an employer and you have less than 25 members of staff, you are also excluded from the application of the national minimum wage. And finally, if you are an employee in an aircraft or a ship or a merchant shipping, and the application of civil aviation regulations or merchant shipping regulation applies to you, then you are also excluded from the application of the national minimum wage. Now let's look at what are the procedures towards the formation or towards the enactment or towards the negotiation of a national minimum wage. Section 5 of the National Minimum Wage Act provides that there shall be a tripartite committee on national minimum wage. This committee is comprised of 3 major parts, and that is why it is tripartite. So it has the organized labor, it has the federal government, which would ordinarily have the state and local government, that's the government side, and it also has the organized private sector. The organized private sector is usually chambers of commerce and generally the organized private sector, and they are to negotiate a new minimum wage 6 months before the expiration of a current minimum wage. So 6 months before that expiration. Another thing you should also note is that the National Minimum Wage Act is pegged at 30,000.